All right, everybody, it is 6:30, so I will call this meeting to order. Sorry, that's quite right. That's quite right. Got your attention, didn't it? I want to acknowledge with great respect that we are meeting on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, and we are honored to have the opportunity to build strong working relationships with the people of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. With that, I will look for an approval of the agenda. That's the near term, long term, and committee of the whole agenda for June 20th. And if there are no additions, we'll consider them approved by consent, unanimous consent. And not seeing any hands, so the agendas are approved by unanimous consent. And Amanda, Councillor Parkinson is away. We haven't heard from him, I guess, eh? Okay, no problem. Yeah, he's just running late. Under approval of the minutes, we have one set of minutes from June the 6th. If there are no errors or omissions, we will consider them approved by unanimous consent. I'm not seeing any hands, so they are so adopted by unanimous consent. There he is. Right, we'll go on to item number 4, public participation. Members of the public will be provided an opportunity to present concerns or ask questions of council. Comments pertaining to the following matters that have been subject to a public hearing are prohibited at this time. And that's bylaw 1700-05, official community plan housekeeping amendment, and bylaw 1913 CD 33 2350 Souk Road. Amanda, do we have anyone registered to speak? Okay, so I will open it up to the public. Now is your time to come up to the podium and ask a question or provide a statement. And I'm not seeing anyone clamoring to speak, so we will move right on to item number 5.1 under new business. Jill Collinson, Senior Planner and Modus Planning, Design and Engagement on the draft Gateway and Triangle Lands Vision and Action Plan public comment period. Jill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we are here tonight to share the draft Gateway and Triangle Lands Vision and Action Plan. So last November, the city embarked upon a visioning process specific to these lands. Modus Planning, Design and Engagement was brought on as a project consultant to help facilitate this. So the Gateway area includes parcels fronting the Island Highway corridor from the entrance of Colwood up to Whale Road, and then the Triangle lands, which are encapsulated by Whale Road, Goldstream, and Souk Road Island Highway. So the draft Gateway and Triangle Lands Vision and Action Plan is included as Appendix 1 of the report before you tonight. And the study area is shown on page 3 of that draft plan. So with that, I would like to virtually welcome Edward Porter, Principal at Modus, to offer a project overview and introduce you to the draft Gateway and Triangle Lands Vision and Action Plan. So Edward is coming to us virtually this evening, and I will turn it over to him.
Thanks, Jill. Edward, over to you.
Thanks so much, Jill, and thank you, Mayor and Council, for having me virtually this evening. I will, for my first feat, share a screen. And that worked. Wonderful. Yeah, so I'm going to keep our presentation brief. And everyone can see that? Yes? Okay. There's
yes.
A little echo there. I'll keep the presentation brief as we've only got about 10 minutes. I'm Edward Porter, Principal and Senior Urban Designer with Modus, Planning, Design, and Engagement. I'm also joined this evening by Jessica Mann, Senior Urban Designer and Project Manager. She'll be joining us after the presentation in the Q&A portion of our discussion. And just have a few slides to share with you this evening. Wanted to first begin with an overview of where we've been to date and reflect on the time we've spent and sort of the steps along the way, acknowledging that we began this project in earnest, kicking off in November of 2021. We had our council working session and some staff kickoff there. And we were originally scheduling some landowner workshops there that you see as kind of a first next step in January or December, I should say, in January. But thanks to COVID, we actually wound up moving that second landowner workshop into March, both out of an abundance of caution with respect to COVID rates at that time, but also because I think everyone through our working sessions with staff, council, and our initial gateway landowner charrette, or I should say that the landowner charrette that we had with the Triangle landowners group in December, we just really wanted to get back together in person again, as we felt that was a very effective and meaningful way of exploring these opportunities. So we came back together in March and had another successful engagement at that stage. And then the stage around drafting the vision and action plan really gave us the month of April to pull everything together. We sat again with council in early May to have a quick check-in, and we've been working a little bit on a bit of refinement prior to the opportunity to share the final draft plan this evening. So really wanted to just there say, thanks to everyone who's participated to date in what we have felt has been a very steady process, a very reasonable timeline to both execute the work and reflect on it and pull it together, and really appreciate the thoughtful and considerate dialogue of everyone who's participated to date in getting where we are this evening. Also wanted to mention, just for context, our efforts certainly began with a lot of great work preceding. We wanted to acknowledge the existing official community plan, and through this vision and action plan, wanted to be very intentional about where and why and how we might propose any amendment to that long-range planning policy document. As well, we recognize several major transportation infrastructure and service projects that are underway and in the pipeline that really lend themselves to community transformation, namely the arrival of rapid bus service that moves right through the heart of the study area as we considered it, the proposed transit exchange location, as well as the overpass along the Galloping Goose, and what that affords in terms of placemaking opportunities and active transportation and connectivity within and beyond the community. Finally, last but certainly not least, we wanted to recognize that the effort here through the planning work and all of the dialogue has certainly considered the many in-stream development applications and the interests of local landowners for their knowledge and know-how in terms of how these projects ultimately will come to be built. So with that, we note that when we first kicked this off, the early work together in late 2021 really charted the path together, guided by this vision of a vibrant, inviting community heart and gateway to the city. Beyond that vision, there was a set of explicit values that guided our process around sustainability, ecological integrity, traffic and accessibility, maintaining natural views, exploring opportunities for housing diversity to address issues of affordability, and making sure that our process was both transparent and represented the greatest level of integrity. As we got deep into the landowner workshops, we wanted to just cover off some of the key messages that we heard. We heard a lot of the following messages sort of echoed throughout, but recognizing the beautiful natural assets that we wanted to recognize and protect and enhance and celebrate through the planning effort. A real strong sense of community within the city of Colwood, and specifically in these areas in particular. A real focus on implementation strategy across staff, council, and landowners. Just making sure that we really held ourselves to the real test of how we get this done, so that it's not just a plan on a shelf. Recognizing transportation connections, again, as alluded to in those major projects and the import there. recognizing residential needs and the need for, again, housing diversity, targeting affordability, and a mix of individual residential needs for aging in place and otherwise, as well as accessibility needs, recognizing that we've got some really major streets that move through the community, and how do we grow in a way that's going to continue to connect us and make these places and these neighborhoods more accessible and not less accessible. Following on that, and again, you'll see some similar messaging here, but I think unique as well. A real interest in the conditions of the galloping goose and how it moves through the center of Colwood here in the Triangle lands, and what placemaking opportunities exist around that. Again, the emphasis on timing and phasing as it relates to implementation. An acknowledgement of the role that the WSPR, the West Shore Parks and Rec lands, have to play within the community, and recognizing that's part of a much larger conversation. Interest in the opportunity that residential density brings in terms of implementation and value to landowners in the sense of redevelopment. Questions around capacity and Whale Road, and I would say larger road network overall, and recognizing the need to move traffic through this area while wanting to explore ways to make things more pedestrian friendly and less dominated by traffic. And finally, exploring the options of additional access points to alleviate some of that traffic. And some of that was specifically around the discussion of Wilford and the extension through our neighbor to the east in View Royal. So all of this came together, and you'll see this reflected in the planning work throughout. We really focused on three fundamentals. One on the concept of structure and function, another on placemaking and connection, and finally on optimizing space and value creation. It's a whole lot of planning talk, and really what we wanted to emphasize here with structure and function, it's about preserving opportunities. It's about making sure that we have good public networks, public space, streets, and connections, and making sure that we do that in a way that doesn't paint us into a corner. That in dedicating roadways and creating functional block scale and patterns within these lands, that we have opportunity to grow over time and evolve and mature in different forms of development, while also protecting those spaces for people in public space. That ties into part two, or that second fundamental around placemaking connection. Again, emphasizing through this process that really at the end of the day, what we're wanting to make sure we're planning for places for people. We talked about thinking like a neighborhood, and that was a real emphasis of our process and our dialogue throughout, is let's make sure that we keep people at the center of this process. And finally, on optimizing space and value creation, we want to make sure that we're thinking about layering of uses, and thinking about how do we create long-term value for the landowners, but also for the community, and how do we share that value through that richness and layering of uses and opportunity over time that ties through implementation and phasing of that amenity and that service to the community. So here we sort of transition into the plan itself beyond the context. This is what we call the plan on a page, and it's exactly that. We try and basically cram everything onto one page with a lot of the key messages and visual renderings as well. It's a little bit hard to read, I'm sure, on screen there, and for those who are joining online. So I'm going to break this out a little bit, but I wanted to flash this up during the presentation for folks who want to actually explore the plan as well, because this actual page lives within the plan and serves as a really nice reference to bring a lot of the plan content together. Back to that, the land use concept though, and specifically showing these neighborhood precincts. Two things we wanted to emphasize here was that, what this plan is showing in a series of sort of, illustrative massing and footprints is really around the incremental growth of this, or emphasizing incremental growth of this plan, and that it is something that we anticipate will take, between 30 and 50 years to fully see build out of, highlighting really the generational opportunity that we have here today, and thinking about how all these disparate pieces and precincts come together. So we've identified A as a Galloping Goose precinct, really focusing around the energy and the opportunity of something where unique forms of development and relationships can happen around the Galloping Goose and the overpass over Souk Road. B becomes the Triangle Lands precinct, and it really is connected to that parcel, or the Galloping Goose precinct. We wanted to create it as something that was also unique and distinct, partly for landform and how it's related, but partly in order to give these places their own individual centers and opportunities so that they're not completely reliant on the other. And that goes to the second point of emphasis here around long-term flexibility. A big part of this plan is also recognizing that this plan will implement and grow and come to fruition over time based on individual landowners and opportunities at that scale. So we don't want to necessarily put all of our eggs in one basket. And one of the ways that we looked at doing that was looking at some of these logical breaks around large infrastructure and some of those placemaking opportunities, as well as some major landowner, whether it's individual landowners who have significant land holdings within these precincts, or whether it's individual, like with the case of Precinct C and the West Shore Parks and Rec lands. Obviously, we have a different entity to be working with and exploring that vision entirely. So the intent, again, is that we have long-term flexibility across all of these precincts to bring them on individually or collectively. They form a whole as well. Now stepping into some of the character of these ideas, here we've stepped into that urban condition around the Galloping Goose. And if this opportunity could come to pass, what we see is the bikeway that now animates and is activated by community uses that link the Triangle Lands up above, down below to the heart of the Galloping Goose precinct. Another view here, we're in the Triangle Lands and looking at the High Street condition. To the right here around this corner is the linkage down to that Galloping Goose precinct. But here we see the opportunity for, again, some of those mixed use commercial buildings where you have the opportunity to hold some residential uses above and a nice pedestrianized high street, which allows for people, well, I should say it allows for traffic to access these individual precincts, but those streets are designed to be the character of smaller scale pedestrian friendly streets, so that our pedestrian experience isn't constantly defined by and overwhelmed by the scale of more highway traffic volumes along the arterial movement and Souk Road and even Whale Road. You'll see this indication of a signature tower, and you'll see that in a few very specific locations throughout the plan. We've identified these signature towers in a few places where we understand the need for opportunity for higher density to bring opportunity for greater community amenity and dedication. So in this case, the opportunity for that tower is a big part of then the trade for the dedication of that roadway and a pedestrian connection down to the Galloping Goose precinct as well. Here's another example of that when we're looking on the north side of the Gateway Mixed Use Employment Center. And again, what we see is the opportunity to create this internalized high street off of Souk Road that you see on the left-hand side of your screen. And it's those tower elements within this plan, which is really defined by, between 4 and 6 stories of mixed use development, that you would then start to see opportunities for major intersection improvements, high street dedications, and other plaza and public realm features. Finally, we're not sure about how those buildings, those individual buildings, and that level of density will ultimately be built. Again, subject to individual land use interests and market opportunity. And so really what we've focused on within the plan is this idea of a robust chassis, showing that strong framework and the structure and function of the way all these land uses come together. We've identified with these asterisks, these kind of stars, where we see some opportunities for real signature elements, whether it's a key feature of a tower that can help define the dedicated public realm, or whether it's the retention of a beautiful landmark outcrop in the Gary Oak forests and the knoll there that define the gateway entrance to Colwood. That's my summary of the plan as it stands today. And I'd like to bring us back for a moment to thank you for the opportunity to open the floor to questions and perhaps to revisit any of the content here within the plan on the page or the larger plan itself. So thank you very much.
The public know and committee that we did receive one piece of correspondence in favor of the draft Gateway and Triangle Lands Vision and Action Plan after the agenda was published. However, it will be appended to the agenda. So with that, we will come to committee, and I see Councillor Baxter.
So you mentioned that this is maybe a 30 to 50 year plan, and possibly it's even longer, depending on how the economy goes at various times. But I'm glad that we've done this, because there are really, really key pieces of property that appear to be moving towards development in our downtown. And they need to develop in a context that we all agree is where we want to go. Otherwise, we get whatever particular developers propose. If we don't have a strong context to show them where we want to go, then obviously they're left to make up their own mind. Whereas it's better this way, where you have worked with the property owners and tried to come up with something that everybody's going to be happy with. People talk about generational change, but this is really lifetime change. Most of the people in this room will probably be retired, or like me, probably dead before this is finished. So 30 years, I'll be very lucky if I'm still breathing. And you know, it requires a lot of imagination to think that far ahead, and I'm really pleased that we got a team that appears to have done that. But one of the things that the people around this table really need to think about is that we won't be making the decisions on most of this. The next council may get a chance to make a decision on one or two developments that might be key to setting this off. But otherwise, in some sense, it will be a plan on a shelf, but hopefully nobody forgets where the shelf is whenever we need it, and it's pulled out again. But future councils, future staff will have their own thoughts, and changes in economy, changes in technology, changes in people's way of living may dictate things we can't imagine yet, but we've got to start somewhere. So a few questions. The renderings you drew, none of those included Souk Road. These are all internal roads off Souk Road, I believe. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, good. So have you attempted to imagine what Souk Road would look like, or are you assuming it would carry on more or less the way it is now with the addition perhaps of rapid transit?
Yeah, it is my understanding that it will continue, to be defined by those sorts of major transportation needs, including rapid bus and others. In that sense, I believe there is a cross-section included within the OCP currently. And then beyond that, I would suggest that, it's not to say that we can't have certain guidelines around the interface of buildings and Souk Road. I think our intent was, and this came pretty early on in the project, we didn't want to, I don't want to say waste time, but we didn't want to spend much time thinking about taming Souk Road. And we didn't want to think about investing in trying to pedestrianize that edge so much as thinking about an alternate network of internal roads that would be far easier to control the scale and character for pedestrian quality. It's not to say we turn our back to it and forget about it, but the real emphasis of this project was certainly thinking about the roads beyond Souk.
Thank you. And the one thing I would say about taking this plan to the public is it needs to be really, really prominently said near the beginning of any document that this is intended to happen over a very long time frame. People have a tendency when there's any kind of plan to think that we're going to start on it tomorrow and it'll be finished next year. And clearly that's impossible with this one. And it's not even, one wouldn't even hope to do it in a year or 10 years. So I hope that will be right at the front of the plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. I believe Ian Borhill, the Director of Community Planning, wants to add on to what Edward was speaking about.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to Councillor Baxter's question about Souk Road, I'll remind Council that, or excuse me, Committee of the Whole, that Council has in its strategic plan a public realm improvement plan project for Souk Road earmarked for 2022. We're hoping to get direction on the private lands through this project and then move immediately to the visioning exercise that would define elements of the streetscape.
Great, thank you. We'll move on to Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Edward. Thank you, Jessica. I think you actually delivered exactly what we asked for and we're looking for. It's a great exercise, interesting stuff, and then quite exciting potential. Of course, as with everything, the devil's in the details. And I think you did talk a little bit about implementation strategy, and that's one thing I guess I worry about a little bit. There's an awful lot of development proposed, an awful lot of residences. Right now, Colwood probably gets, I think, about 300 new units a year of one shape or another. And of course, we have some major projects in South Colwood competing for that. Colwood has had a history of zoning sites for high rises for quite some time, and none of them get built. And I think it's to do with the absorption rates. So I think the implementation and how we do that is something to really test this in future councils and how we try to stick to the plan or at least close to it. And it's also going to be very hard on the property owners. If you own a piece of property there and somebody says, "Wow, have we got a great project for you in 50 years?" That may not be all that palatable. Especially, it may make a lot more economic sense to build something today and tear it down in 40 years. It doesn't meet the plan. So the whole implementation strategy is going to be a challenge. I don't expect anybody to answer it tonight. Maybe some steps to take by sort of picking an area and then giving it a head start on the rest or something. I just wonder if you have sort of more thoughts or detail on that at this point.
I would keep my comment brief, and that's to say I hear you, and you're absolutely right. You know, the way this plan gets implemented over time is there's so many variables at play, and there are lots of it could move in many different directions. I think the power of what we've just done together is that we now have a picture that we can then have a conversation around the how, the why, the where. And what I mean specifically is even if it's not high rise, even if we get into something that's much more, well, call it what it is, low risk, right? Let's build something that we know we can sell within a sales phase, not even a market cycle. Even if we start to look at that, and we look at the structure and function of these local roadways, and we use that development, even at a more modest scale and immediate sense, to build a network of pedestrian-friendly streets that are built to a quality standard, I think we're moving much closer to that ultimate end goal of creating neighborhoods and places for people and mix of use. And so, you know, these towers that we're showing are opportunity sites, but if those don't materialize in the immediate, I don't believe that it's hinging on that level of density in order to move the needle for the Triangle and Gateway lands. I think there's a lot of opportunity here held within more of a typical 6-story wood frame format. And that's a good thing. And that's where we wanted to make sure that we see flexibility in the plan. I think there are opportunity sites, and those opportunity sites could then do much more, certainly in those locations where you want to see it. But I think there is a more modest incremental growth option here.
Thank you. And luckily we have a couple of Cracker Jacks in our community planning department who can help work through those issues. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Parkinson. We'll go to Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to reiterate Councillor Baxter's comment that in big bold letters someplace right in front of the document that, you know, the public has to be aware that this is a 30 to 50 year. You did mention it, Edward, during your presentation, but I think it really has to stand out. The second thing, the question I'm going to ask staff, particular through the chair to Ian Borhill, maybe you have it, or maybe Jill does. I don't know. But how is this different than our OCP? Like, I try to read the OCP, and then what this says, like, what's the difference here? Except this has prettier pictures.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Maybe if committee doesn't like my answer, Jill can take a shot. So really, we're looking at this as a strategic document that's almost at a higher level than the Fish Community Plan. The Fish Community Plan is a document that's intended to provide 10 years vision for the community. It's meant to be a document that's revised every 5 years. What we have in front of us is a document that's actually calling for changes to the existing Fish Community Plan. Right now, Caldwood Corners land use designation has a guideline for 12 to 15 stories maximum height. This plan would require an amendment to the OCP to increase it to 20 to 25 plus. So in that sense, this is a document that would drive change in the OCP if adopted. And I will say that those changes are based on evidence that we collected through this process. Feedback from the property owners and from developers indicated to us that to make some of these improvements feasible, we needed to look at higher than 15 stories.
Okay, so just a continuation of the question then. So I believe the recommendation for council, what you want us to decide on tonight, is whether we release this to the public and to the stakeholders and get their feedback. I believe that's what's required. So what else is involved in this? How much more effort has to go into this is my next question. Like, you know, what is what is the involvement? How much more time for council? How much staff time? Do you have any idea at this point in time?
Through the chair, I would hazard, I guess, to say about 10% of the total project resources are yet to be expended on the next phase. That is, of course, dependent on what we hear back from the community. If there's significant elements of the plan that are met with disdain from key members of the public, such as property owners, we would have to do more work, obviously, to address that. But in a general sense, we see a relatively minor amount of work to carry through the project.
Fair enough. So, it's like I said, in our current paradigm that we're in, I mean, it's very visionary in the current paradigm. Who the heck knows what we're going to look like in 50 years time? And I mean, I could never ask anyone around the table because who knows? But I guess the last concern that I have, and I don't know how, I think you sort of addressed this a little bit, is this is, we're spending money on this project. How do we make this sort of a legacy document? Because it's not like an OCP, right? It's their legacy documents that you can always go back to. And I'm just afraid of some things that have happened here, just in our term here as council, where we didn't understand some legacy issues and wasn't well documented, and we got surprised. So this, the time and effort that's being put in this, how do we establish this as a sort of a legacy document so that people don't forget about it? That's all I have.
Thank you for that question through the chair. A great question. Really, we're talking about as it's laid out, an action plan as much as it is a vision. So in that sense, we are looking to this document to lay the foundation for the adjudication of land use decisions that will be brought before council this year. So we've got property owners who have stated their intent they'd like to move immediately to rezoning. This document would be fundamental to the guidance we provide to those property owners. The additional longevity of this document will come through amendments to the official community plan, most likely. I could hazard, I guess, to say that we could have a whole section of the official community plan that was based on this document, depending on its success through the final consultation stage.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Kobayashi. We'll go to Councillor Day next.
Thank you. So I have a couple of comments. The first is the same comment that I made when we brought in our OCP, which is that when we're depicting the community, and I did see a number of places where comments that I made about accessibility were highlighted in the little word balloons in the presentation. But when it comes to the pictures of what our community looks like, there are no disabled people. There's a dog, there's bikes, there's pedestrians that are able-bodied. There's no disabled people in our pictures. There's no crutches, there's no wheelchairs. And I'm trying to help us to change that over time. And I realize that's a challenge. But we have, when I currently drive through this area, I often see numerous mobility scooters on the very minimal sidewalks that exist on Souk Road, crossing at Goldstream at Souk. And so they're very much a part of our community, and I'm hoping that we can be inclusive in both our words and our pictures. As far as the vision for this and the fact that this is a document that would sit outside of the official community plan, that is difficult for me. There's a lot of single family homes still remain in this neighborhood. And I realize this is a very long horizon, but I don't want to forget that it's really important to maintain the livability of your neighbor when we're talking about developing. We're always working with our neighbors, and I think it's really important. I don't think anybody wants to be overlooked. I don't think anybody wants to be living in the shadow of a large building. So I think that's a critical part that we need to get right. And if it's outside of the OCP, in fact, a longer vision, then it should have more input from the community, or regular input, maybe. Maybe there's a stepped process that it goes through, and maybe there's some locations that no one would have any objections to any height you want to build there. But there are some locations where it may be very difficult for neighbors. Just recently have seen this happening in neighboring communities where somebody has lived in a home for more than 30 years, and suddenly there's a very large building being put up right in their backyard. And that is very unsettling for people. So I think there needs to be some sort of mechanism. Maybe that's through the ordinary channels of public process, but we have this debate at the OCP, and now we are basically putting this portion of our OCP in the trash bin and replacing it with something different. We said 12 to 15 stories for this area. Now we're talking 50. So I'm not going to object to the community having input on this, but it is a big change, and it means that the OCP, that a lot of people put tremendous effort into participating and explaining the parts of Colwood that are critical and important, is not the document that they thought they were helping to build. My last concern is that of the opportunity lands, the West Shore Parks and Rec lands. Those lands are park, and planning to build in parks is a dangerous box to open. And that's been pointed out to me by residents in the past who have made it very clear that once your parks are on the table for development, it can be very difficult to reel that back in. So those are the concerns that I have. I'm also very aware that the pictures might be very acceptable, but the creating a reality that matches them is extremely difficult. The devil is always in the details, and if we can find a vision that both the community and the landowners are excited about, I think we could create some really fabulous landmarks for the future. But I hope that doesn't come at the price of the community being heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Day. We'll go with Councillor Jansen.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to move the recommendation, and I do have a couple of follow-ups.
Thank you. So the motion on the floor, motivate us, Councillor Jansen.
Well, a couple of questions, sorry. Well, firstly, I am keen to hear what the public has to say on this, which is why I think it's time that we give this a kick and send it out to the public. But a couple of questions for likely staff here. This is, I mean, my interpretation of this is that this is an aspirational document, and if we can talk a little bit about moving from aspirational to actualizing something of this magnitude, can you give us a few seconds on what that looks like? I mean, my fear is this work gets all done over again next council or next term, and when the rug gets pulled out or someone has a fresh idea and away we go again. So we talk about the longevity of this and as much as you can.
I will attempt my best. So through Mr. Chair, it is an aspirational document. It is intended to be 30+ years. It is intended to provide long-term vision to the community. How it's implemented is ultimately up to who is sitting in your chair in the future. How it can be moved forward is through OCP amendment considerations, through rezonings, or through other city-based initiatives. And timing on that is ultimately up to the elected officials at that point in time.
So your answer is it's up to me, not. That's not an acceptable answer. Thank you. But I do see an opportunity upcoming here. I presume that we're back into an OCP process, I guess, in 23. Is that right?
So through Mr. Chair, our OCP was adopted in 2018. Typically after a 5-year process, it undergoes a review. This information could help to support that upcoming review process. OCP documents are usually a 10-year life cycle of a document, so we're roughly halfway through ours. This visioning process to date has been used as a check-in with landowners, with yourselves and with staff, as to see what is that aspirational goal for the future, and to implement that could include the OCP update that would be forthcoming in 2022-23.
So I think you've heard what some council members have said, that there is the two are sort of incongruent at this point in time. So aligning those at the earliest opportunity, I think, would be an important step in the right direction. Sorry, I guess that's not a question. Sorry, Jill. Thank you. Now, West Shore Parks and Rec. I mean, I think there is an opportunity here, and I am live to what Councillor Day points out, that these are parklands. I think the only difference would be that I think the structure of that park and the management of that facility is so dramatically different than one of our parks that looking for an opportunity to add to the amenities and rebuild and replace what's there, is exciting. And I think I'm looking forward to see what West Shore Parks and Rec board comes back with in this. Sorry, Ian, you want a piece of me as well?
Thank you, through the chair. To follow up on Ms. Collinson's excellent answer, I wanted to also add that council has directed staff to undertake an upzoning of the triangle lands. So we've had very patient property owners that have allowed this process to unfold and to involve as many stakeholders as we could in the landowner group. But they're getting anxious. They want to move forward, and we're looking at, as quickly as possible on the heels of this project, bringing forward a combined rezoning and a fishery plan amendment that would see implementation of the changes that you're talking about as soon as possible.
Yeah, thanks. That's great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jansen. So on the motion that Councillor Jansen made, that council endorse the draft Gateway and Triangle Lands Vision and Action Plan for the purposes of seeking public and stakeholder comment. On the motion, Mayor Martin.
Thank you. I will speak in favor of the motion. I will be supporting it this evening. I first of all, I wanted to thank Edward and his team for the work that you guys have done. I'm very proud of it. I'm excited that we have a vision and that we're working towards a vision. I think it's a really responsible thing as a city to sort of have that and to be able to at least be able to explain it to our development community. I tell you, I meet with regularly, I meet with developers, and if it's somebody new to the community, first question out of their mouth to me is, well, what do you want here? And so by having a vision and having an understanding of what we want, we can respond in a reasonable way to our development community and be really helpful to them as well, so that they are supporting what we are aspirational for. I'm excited to hear what the public has to say to this. I don't think that this is final by any means. I think that we're probably going to need to look at modifying it depending on what we hear from the public. But also, one of the things that I think is really important by having this vision is it also helps from a standpoint of provincial and federal governments. When you're able to explain to the provincial and federal government where this community is going, they are much more likely to look at investing into your community and demonstrating the supports that you will need to see that density grow. So I'm excited about that. We will see increased investment in infrastructure, services, and jobs through the provincial and federal governments by having a vision and demonstrating where we're going. I also do want to remind us that we had a Royal Bay High School student here last week, Colin Sparks, and he was talking about active transportation and sharing his concepts and concerns and visions. And I recall Councillor Parkinson asked and said, well, what is one of the things that we could be doing to help? And Colin's response was, well, looking at densifying along those routes that would support that. And I think that's a really strong thing that I heard and that I'm hearing a lot from young people. A lot of young people do not have the opportunity or means to get into a single family home. They need to have a diverse quality and standings in townhouses, apartments, and other things. And so I think we're really meeting the needs of young people by identifying this is where we're going. So I'm excited about that. In regards to Warshall Park and Rec, I would love to see those lands eventually develop, but I'm not believing that they ever will. Just with 5 owners, I have a hard time believing that there would be consensus there. So if it happens, that's wonderful. But I've seen that in the past. And so I will be supporting the motion this evening, and I've very much appreciated the work that both our staff have done and Edward, you and your team have done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Martin. I don't see any further speakers, so I will call the question on the motion. Those that are opposed? Not seeing any opposed, so the motion passes unanimously. Looking for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Kobayashi. Those opposed? Not opposed. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.